for Northern Regional Center for Independent Living. It's a peer-run disability rights and resource center. We are part of a larger network of independent living centers throughout New York State. And our mission is to promote efforts to end discrimination against people with disabilities. And we do that by partnering with different organizations within the community, as well as people in our community, to create an accessible and inclusive society. So my program specifically is the Family Support Program, and we offer a number of different supports in the Family Support Program. Particularly, we offer educational advocacy. So all of the members of my team are family peer advocates, meaning that we have gone through a credentialing process, and we are certified by the state in order to work with parents who have children with disabilities, because we are also parents of children with disabilities. So we understand what it's like to go through various systems and work with different systems. As far as educational advocacy goes, we are trained in special education and special education law. So we know what parents' rights are in the process, and we can help you navigate those different systems. A lot of times it's just fostering open communication with your school and making sure that your concerns are being heard by the school, and that they're providing all of the supports and services that are necessary for your child to be successful. We also provide some family peer support. So we recognize that having a child with a disability is a little bit more challenging than raising a typical child with a disability or without a disability. So we offer support in encountering those challenging situations. We can help you navigate various different systems that you may or may not have encountered before, and offer you support along the way. One of the ways that we do that is through information and referral services. So we're familiar with the different agencies and the support systems that are out there in the community. So we can help you access those services by either just helping you make a phone call or providing you with the information for those supports and assisting you along the way if you need some help. And finally, we offer some groups and training opportunities. So similar to what we're doing tonight with our training for ADHD, we offer various training throughout the year for different topics. A lot of times families or groups will come to us and say, hey, would like some information on this particular topic, and we'll put something together for you. And we have a rotating group, a rotating list of different support and self-help groups that we offer for a variety of different age ranges, all the way from parenting classes to transition groups for teenagers with disabilities and anger support groups. So all of those things are listed on our website. It's www.nrcil.net. So if you'd like some more information on that, you can go to our website, or I'll have my contact information at the end. So you can always give me a call if you'd like some more information. All right, but you didn't come to hear about me and NERCL. You came to hear about ADHD. So it might help to define what ADHD is. So ADHD stands for Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder. It's a neurological disorder that impacts different parts of the brain, and those parts of the brain that it impacts help us to be able to plan, focus, and execute on different tasks. There's 3 different types of ADHD. They include an inattentive type, a hyperactive, impulsive type, and then there's a combination of the 3 or of the 2. Statistically, about 1 in 10 children are diagnosed with ADHD in the United States, with boys being twice as likely as girls to be diagnosed with ADHD. And it's possible for adults to be diagnosed with ADHD as well, with about 4% of adults being diagnosed with ADHD. And a lot of people don't know that they have ADHD. They confuse it with something else until they end up going to a behavioral health specialist or a mental health professional for assistance with something else, and find out later on that it is ADHD that's impacting them. Some of the common characteristics of ADHD are things that we're probably all familiar with. They include a lack of ability to pay attention, a lack of focus, issues with time management skills, a very poor impulse control, exaggerated emotions. So when they feel like they are sad or upset or angry, it's not your typical emotional response to something. It's a very over the top response. They hyper focus on different things, particularly things that you wouldn't expect them to hyper focus on. There's a heightened level of activity, and they oftentimes will have what's called executive dysfunction, which is skills that enable us to plan, focus, pay attention, remember instructions, and manage multiple tasks. These are things that a lot of times we learn by observation or by looking at other people and picking those skills up through just going through our daily lives. But a lot of times people with ADHD have a very difficult time being able to plan and organize their day. And so we call this executive dysfunction. We'll talk a little bit more about this as we move on. So like I said earlier, there are 3 different types of ADHD. Recently, they updated the criteria for being diagnosed with ADHD. So what they used to call ADD is now called the inattentive type of ADHD. So the predominantly inattentive type of ADHD includes difficulty focusing or finishing tasks and following instructions. People with the inattentive type are typically easily distracted and they become forgetful. They may be those kids that we call daydreamers because they lose track of their homework, they lose track of things that they're supposed to be keeping track of, that we would think would be easy things for them to be able to manage, but they really seem to have a difficult time with. And it's important to note that experts believe that many of the children who have the inattentive subtype of ADHD can often go undiagnosed because they don't tend to disrupt the learning environment as much as their peers who have the predominantly hyperactive impulsive type of ADHD. So on the flip side, people who do have that hyperactive and impulsive type of ADHD oftentimes are described as being driven by a motor. They're constantly in motion. And they also have very little impulse control. My brother was diagnosed with ADHD when he was a kid, and he was the kind of kid that would act first and think about it later. So when you would ask him, why did you do that? He would say, well, it seemed like a great idea at the time. I didn't think about why to do it. I did it because it seemed like a great idea. We oftentimes think of the physical symptoms of having this hyperactive impulsive type of ADHD. So that includes things like physical movement, squirming, talking, even at the most inappropriate of times. They're oftentimes seen as very impatient, and they will oftentimes be considered rude and interrupt other people. And then, of course, when you're looking at the combined type of ADHD, you're going to find some sort of combination of the 2 types of ADHD, the inattentive and the hyperactive impulsive type. With the combined type, in order to be diagnosed with ADHD, you have to have a set number of symptoms of one type or another in order to be diagnosed with ADHD. The combined type, they really look at if you have a number from one set and then a number from another set, and they put those together. That's when they really look at that combined type diagnosis. So it's important to note that this is definitely not supposed to be any kind of clinical overview of ADHD by any stretch. So this is really just a basic overview of what ADHD is. I would encourage you that if you have questions or concerns about your child maybe having ADHD, to please talk to a professional to get some more insight and some more information about ADHD. And I'm going to flip my light on there. Is there any questions? I can't see everybody's faces, but if you do have any questions, you can feel free to unmute yourself and jump in, or type those questions into the chat box, because I do get an alert when there's questions in the chat.
Jennifer,
Yes.
I was just going to ask you real quick, because I didn't hear you. Boys or girls have more ADHD? Was it boys?
It's typically boys. Boys are twice as likely to be diagnosed with ADHD as girls. And 1 in 10 kiddos are diagnosed with ADHD. So
Okay.
if you're looking at classroom types, the most likely diagnosis in your classroom, other than a learning disability, would be a child diagnosed with ADHD.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. So just to get a little bit more information about the different subtypes. So the inattentive type, when we're looking at a child with the inattentive type in the classroom, some of the things to pay attention for is this kid often fails to give close attention to details, or they make really careless mistakes. They oftentimes have difficulty sustaining attention to tasks or play activities. So they might have a difficult time paying attention during lectures or conversations, or they're drifting off when they're supposed to be doing some lengthy reading or paying attention during a read aloud session. Oftentimes these kids don't listen when they're spoken to directly, and it seems like their mind is elsewhere, or they're oftentimes seen as being absent even without any obvious distraction being seen. They don't follow through on directions, and they fail to finish schoolwork, chores, or duties in the workplace. And another example of this would be they start tasks, but they quickly lose focus and they're easily sidetracked. These kiddos often have difficulty organizing tasks and activities. So things like managing sequential tasks, difficulty keeping materials and belongings in order. Their desks or their lockers are often messy and disorganized. And these kids have really poor time management skills, and they fail to meet deadlines. They often avoid, dislike, or they're reluctant to engage in tasks that require sustained mental work. So if there's a really long homework assignment, or if they have a really long passage to do for reading, they might be resistant to doing that, knowing that it's going to be a difficult task for them to do. They often lose things that are necessary to complete tasks. So they'll lose pencils, or they are constantly having to borrow materials. They can't keep track of their glasses, or they're losing their cell phone or their books constantly. They're often easily distracted by outside stimuli. So these are the kids that you don't want to put next to the hallway door or near the windows, because they will get distracted. And they're forgetful about daily activities. So they need constant reminders to do things like completing chores, running errands, or even things like writing down homework assignments in their planner, even though it's something that's expected of them on a daily basis. And now looking at the hyperactive impulsive type, these kids often fidget with their hands, or tap their feet, or squirm in their seat. They leave their seat in situations when remaining seated is expected. So for instance, in the middle of a classroom lecture, they will get up and move around the classroom, often without asking for permission first. They run about or climb in situations where it's not appropriate. And they often describe this as they just feel very restless. They're unable to play or engage in leisure activities quietly. They're on the go or acting as if driven by a motor. So they seem to be unable to be comfortable sitting still for any extended amount of time, such as in restaurants or meetings. And they may be experienced by others as being restless or difficult to keep up with. Oftentimes, kiddos with the hyperactive and impulsive type of ADHD talk excessively, and they blurt out answers to a question before the question has been completed. And again, that combined type of ADHD is usually a combination of all of these symptoms, or a combination of some of these symptoms. They often have difficulty waiting for his or her turn in line, and they disrupt or intrude on others' conversations, activities, or things take things or start things without permission. Any questions about symptoms or characteristics of kids with ADHD before we move on?
It's me again.
Hi.
Alicia, don't let me do all the talking. I was
going, she's pretty much hitting all the points. So I'm just jotting down things, but it's all falling in line with my child. So.
Okay, good.
Well, I was just going to say, I didn't want to be the, the video hog here, whatever you call it. One of the things I want to ask you, which we could wait till the end or whatever, how does technology play a role now with ADHD?
Technology can be a help or a hindrance, and we will definitely touch on that towards the end when we're talking about accommodations. But it's really all in how you manage the technology piece when you're working with your child. So we'll definitely touch on that towards the end, but I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, I was thinking you would. I was like, and I'm like that person was thinking I should wait. And then I was like, well, I might ask her right now because who knows? So
no, I'm glad you brought it up, and remind me if I don't bring it up. So
okay, thanks.
So again, I'm definitely not a professional in as far as a clinical sense goes. So if you're curious about whether your child meets the criteria for ADHD, you definitely want to take the symptoms that you're seeing and talk to either your child's pediatrician or meet with a mental health professional. There is no single tool to diagnose ADHD. Oftentimes, ADHD is almost a rule-out diagnosis. They will look at a variety of different things to determine whether your child will meet the criteria for ADHD, because there's so many other things that can mirror some of the symptoms of ADHD. So in order to meet the criteria of ADHD, they have to show 6 out of the 9 symptoms of ADHD. And these symptoms have to be noticeable for 6 or more months in 2 or more settings. So for instance, you're seeing them at both school and at home. There are some common questionnaires that they use to gather information about ADHD. The 2 most common ones that they use are the Conners Rating Scale and the Vanderbilt Assessment Scale. Although there are other behavior rating scales that can gather that same information, but those are the 2 most commonly used through the school setting. And then if you are concerned about the possibility that there's an ADHD diagnosis in your child's future, or you're concerned and you want to gather some more information, you can always approach your school district about filling out those questionnaires and getting that information from your child's teacher. And we'll talk about that process in a little bit. Like right now. So if you feel like there's some things going on both at school and at home and you're looking for some support, you want to put a request in writing to your district. And with a non-public school such as Carthage Augustinian Academy, you want to put that request in to the district where the school is located. So for Carthage, you're going to submit that request to the Carthage Central School District. I do have some guidance documents that I can send to you if you're interested or you want some help with the referral process. So feel free to give me a call if you want some guidance or some more information about how the process is supposed to go. This is a very brief overview of how to make a referral. But anytime you're talking about special education supports for your child, you definitely want to make sure that you're putting those requests in writing. Once you contact the school of location for your child, the district will contact you to gain consent to evaluate your child. This is a really important step because this will allow you to provide feedback on what kinds of evaluations you're looking for. Typically, they will ask for permission to do a basic cognitive evaluation and some academic testing. But if you're interested in those behavioral assessments that we talked about on the previous slide, you can always ask them to include those evaluations. Once you sign consent and send that back to the district, those evaluations are scheduled and completed. And then as a parent, you're invited to a meeting to discuss the results of those evaluations and whether your child is eligible for any special educations and special supports and accommodations. Now, if they are eligible for special education supports or a 504 accommodation plan, that plan is developed and those services are put in place. If they're not eligible, that's not the end of the road. They will talk to you about some possible supports that they can put in place at the classroom level. This includes things like behavioral supports, classroom supports, and some outside resources that you can access outside of the school. Any questions about that? We covered it really quickly, but that's kind of a brief overview.
I have a quick question. So would this be the process to get your child evaluated for like getting an IEP plan for them for school?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
And like I said, this is a very brief overview. There's a lot of intricacies that go along with that, and there's some timelines, but at the very basic level, this is what the process looks like. So yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. And like I said, if you're interested in having some support with that process, you can always give me a call too.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
You're welcome. So some of the supports that they may offer for you would be some classroom strategies. So those things could include things like a wiggle seat or flexible seating. Wiggle seats are something that your child can sit on that will allow them to have movement within their seat without disrupting other students in the classroom. There's also something cool called resistance bands on their chairs. So that will allow them to swing their legs and push against the legs of the chairs, but not disrupt another student. So they're not like kicking some other student's desk. Preferential seating is also a common accommodation that they allow for. For kids with ADHD, that's usually things like away from distractions in the classroom or close to the instruction so that the classroom teacher can be close by in case they need some behavioral reminders. It could include things like a quiet and a mess-free workspace. So they may be the student that has just a regular table instead of having an open desk where they would store their materials. It could include things like visual schedules and supports. So if they need visual reminders of things that they're supposed to be doing. Another strategy that they could implement would be color coding supplies to match subjects. So that would be things like all of your math supplies would be yellow and all of your social studies supplies would be green. So all of everything for social studies would be green. Your folder, your book would have a green book cover. Your binder would be green. Your pencils would be green. Everything would be green so that you know to grab everything green for that particular class. It's just a visual reminder. Extra sets of books at home to eliminate the possibility of forgetting to bring your textbook home. Notes can be provided ahead of time, and you can use like a fill in the blank format to make sure that the student is participating. Teaching note-taking strategies with things like graphic organizers and using a planner. Breaking large assignments into smaller chunks. Reducing the number of questions a student must complete. And there's a whole list of other different accommodations that they can provide. I don't want to read to you the entire list, but these are not inclusive either. So if you have a strategy that you feel like might be helpful for your child, you can always approach your school and say, hey, can we try this and see if this will work for my kiddo? I think it might be helpful for him. Which leads me into our next thought, which is communication is key. Schools don't often know what you're thinking as a parent and vice versa unless you're communicating. So definitely never be afraid to share your concerns with both your classroom teacher and the administration. They're always willing to help you out and they want to know what kinds of things are going on with you and your child. So if you're going through a diagnosis process, if you're looking for some accommodations, if you're seeing your child is struggling, you want to share those things with your classroom teacher and with the administration. If your child is having some behavioral issues and you feel like you need to keep track of those things, it's always a great idea to start keeping a notebook so that you can track those different behaviors, the dates and the times that they're happening. And then you can take that information to a professional that can help you analyze that information and see whether it's something that needs to have a closer look. Talk to your teacher about what's working and what isn't working. So if you're trying different strategies to address behavioral concerns, there might be some things that work great for one kid with ADHD and not work for your child. So it's always important to remember that every child is different. So one strategy may work and another strategy might not. Always trust your gut. You know your kid better than anybody else. So definitely make sure that you're trying out different strategies. I'm going to ask that you guys mute yourself in the background just so we don't have a lot of background noise. So we talked a lot about school so far, but there's a lot of things that you can do to support your kiddo with ADHD at home. One of the most important things that you can do to support your child with ADHD at home is to create structure. And it seems counterintuitive when we're talking about being at home, because home should be a place where your kids can relax and enjoy things. But kids with ADHD actually thrive on structure and routine. So the more structure that you can create for them, the better it is for them, because they know what to expect throughout their day. And this is going to include things like what Michelle was talking about earlier with access to technology. So technology can be a great tool, and it can also be a detriment, because kids with ADHD, there's been lots of studies that have shown that certain things like tablets and video games can actually heighten some of the things or some of the behaviors that go along with ADHD. So by creating structure and routine, you can kind of limit their access to those things, while at the same time being able to monitor what kind of access they have to that. If you're expecting your child to do things around the home, break some of those big tasks into smaller, manageable pieces. So if your expectation is that they're going to help with the dishes, break that down into smaller steps. The first thing you're going to do is you're going to fill up the sink. The second step you're going to do is you're going to put in the soap. Or if you have a dishwasher, I do things the old-fashioned way. So if you have a dishwasher, first thing you're going to do is you're going to take the clean dishes out and put them where they belong, and maybe have pictures to go along with it if your child is younger. Second thing you're going to do is you're going to take the dirty dishes and rinse them under the sink and then put them in the dishwasher. So breaking those bigger tasks down into smaller pieces can definitely help with managing those routines. Help your child simplify and organize their life. For a lot of kiddos, it's going to look like they have charts and schedules and everything all over the house. It's going to be temporary until they get into that routine and know what those expectations are. But it's helpful to have those things and those reminders around, because it will create that sense of this is what's expected of me. You definitely want to limit distractions, especially with COVID right now and so many kiddos being home from school and doing things remotely. In the areas where you have your child set up to do their schoolwork, you definitely want to have minimal distraction for them, so that there's not a lot of things that are getting in the way of them being able to participate in their school. For kids with ADHD, sleep is super important. So you definitely want to have a very strict bedtime routine, and make sure that you stick with it no matter what. Encourage out loud thinking. I do this with my kids, even though they're not diagnosed with ADHD. So I work with them on, I wonder what would happen if I did this. Or, my 4-year-old does a lot of, Mommy, I want to do this. Well, we could do that, but what would happen if we threw that toy across the room? Yeah, it might put a hole in the wall. And then Mommy would get upset about the hole being in the wall. And then that would make Mommy upset with you. And then we wouldn't have a good day. So talking those things out loud might help them think about the consequences of their actions. Promote some wait time. Let them know, okay, we're going to do this, but we're going to do this in 5 minutes. And you can pair it with a timer if that will help them be able to think about the concept of time. Always believe in your child. Kids with ADHD have a really difficult time managing themselves. And that often comes with a lot of negativity around them. People telling them, I don't understand why you can't do blah, blah, blah. So just showing your kid that you believe in them and that you know that they can do this can make the difference between good behavior and bad behavior. Allow them to take frequent breaks, especially when they're doing mentally demanding tasks, because ADHD comes with a lot of mental load. So allowing them to take breaks where they can just let their brain rest and do what their brain does will help them be able to focus later on. And as with any parenting of any child with any kind of differing ability, you want to take time for yourself. Even if it's just a 5-minute break with a cup of coffee to go, I can do this. It's so important to make sure that you're taking time for yourself. And it's one of the things that as parents, we're so guilty of not taking that time for ourselves. And I'm the number one culprit for not taking time for myself. So definitely you want to make sure that you're taking that time to calm yourself, especially before addressing big behavioral issues, because when you're angry and frustrated, they're going to pick up on that and they're going to mirror that emotion from you. Some don'ts when you're parenting a child with ADHD: don't sweat the small stuff. The more attention you give to small behaviors, the worse those small behaviors are going to get. Don't lash out. When you lash out with anger, you're going to get anger back. So the more calm you can be, the more calmness you're going to get from them. And try not to be negative. If you can find a way to find a positive in a situation, or say, I wonder what we could have done differently, that might shape the behavior in the future. It's so easy sometimes, especially when we're frustrated, to let them or the ADHD control the situation by saying, oh, I've just had enough and I just can't do this anymore. So when you find yourself having those moments, take a minute to say, you know what, we need to deal with this, but not right now. I'm going to take a minute to step back and I'll talk to you about this in a minute. You can take a minute to calm yourself down and then you can come back into that situation. And I know, Michelle, you just posted something in the chat, so I'm going to pull that up. Are some of these suggestions universal for inattentive and hyperactive? Yes. So these are some kind of universal tips and strategies. I would definitely say that for kids who are the more hyperactive type of ADHD, you want to allow lots of opportunities for energy breaks. I know one of the things that really helped my brother a lot, because he had the more hyperactive type, was giving him lots and lots of physical activity breaks. So he did great when he had opportunities to get up and just run around the room, or to get up and just go outside. And it didn't really matter to him what the weather was, as long as he was dressed for it. So, and this was back, I'm dating myself, but this was back in the 80s. So it was before we knew a lot about ADHD and how it impacted kids. So mom would just say, you know what, you need to get out of the house and you need to take a break and get some of this energy out. So she would just send him outside. But our kids with the hyperactive type need that opportunity to just get those bursts of energy out, because then they can come back and they can focus later on. For that inattentive type, you want to allow them those opportunities to let the brain wander, but give them a time frame to do that, and then say, okay, we're going to take a brain break, and then we're going to come back and we're going to focus on what we need to do. All right. So with that, does anybody have any questions about what we talked about? Any specific questions about their kids, or any questions about strategies? Let me see what you got going. And you can feel free to type them in the chat box or unmute yourself so that you can ask those, or comments, anything you want to share.
I was going to say, Jen, one of the things that I loved is we hear a lot about the hyperactive, and we do think of the kids being able to run around and whatever, but the inattentive, like you're educating me on that piece, and just to be able to let the kid's mind wander for a bit.
Mhm.
I love that. So that's something for me to keep in mind too. So I like that suggestion, because I don't feel like we always hear, or at least I haven't always heard about the inattentive side of things.
Right. Yeah, the inattentive type of ADHD is kind of the lesser known one, because there's so much focus on the kids who are hyperactive and impulsive, because they throw themselves out there. They're the ones that are more in the spotlight, because they are in the spotlight. They throw themselves into the spotlight. The inattentive type of kids, they tend to be the dreamers and the ones that kind of sit in the background, and they don't get a lot of attention for that reason. So, allow them to have that opportunity to let their brain wander in a healthy and safe way, but let them have that opportunity to wander and then say, okay, we're going to come back and we're going to focus. And just giving their brain that break, because their brains need that break too.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Anything else?
I do have well, it's just a question. I know you can't, probably fully answer, but one of the things that we deal with our child who is the inattentive type, is not being able to complete the schoolwork during the daytime. That's like our biggest issue. What resources, or what should we be asking for to help with that? Or what can we be doing to help with her being able to complete work in class or outside of class, I guess, too?
Right. So, some of the strategies that you can try with her would be using timers, because I think a lot of times with kids with the inattentive type, they're they don't have a lot of sense of time management skills, and
Right.
so they're not really paying attention to the movement of time around them. So setting a timer where it's a visual reminder of the passage of time might
Okay.
help them be able to focus a little bit better.
Okay.
So you can try pairing a visual timer. There's a great app on your phone that you can download. I don't know if it costs anything or not, but it's called Time Timer.
Okay.
And it's actually a visual timer. So as the time counts down, there's the chunk of time is red. And then as the time counts down, that chunk of red gets smaller and smaller and smaller.
Mm-hmm.
So it's actually like a visual representation of time passing.
Right.
So you can kind of say, as the red goes away, the time is going away.
Mm-hmm.
And allow her, you said it was your daughter? Sorry.
Yes.
Okay.
Mhm.
So allow her to work during that time frame, and then when that time frame is up, and say, okay, now we're going to take a break, give her like a 10-15 minute break, but then say, we're going to come back to this and we're going to spend some more time on getting this done, but you need to get this work done. So
Okay.
but I think pairing it with a timer will be really helpful for her as a strategy. And then sometimes breaking it down into smaller pieces, especially those large assignments, because
Yep.
she can get really overwhelmed seeing big chunks of assignments and
Yes.
not knowing where to start.
Right.
So that might be helpful as well.
Okay.
Alicia, I was going to tell you too, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but we just had an aide start this week who
Yes.
will be helping with any of the students that need it. So if that's something that you would like, I suggest either you reach out to Mrs. Margaret directly, or if you want me to talk to her, but I would utilize that for in school if that's an option we could look into.
Yes, I absolutely definitely would, because this is like her biggest issue is completion of her schoolwork in class. So I'm at this point looking to try anything that's going to help, gear her focus back to trying to complete it. So
Okay, I'll reach out to you tomorrow directly. Does that sound good?
okay. Yeah, that's great.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other thoughts? Well, I know that I'm kind of putting you on the spot for questions. So what I will do is, this is my contact information, and I will share the slides with Michelle. I think I've already sent her a copy of them. So, Michelle, you can feel free to pass this along to anybody who wants a copy of this. But if you want some more information, if you want to chat a little bit more, or you have another question after the presentation is over with, and you want to just ask me directly, you can feel free to call me at 785-8703 extension 232, or you can shoot me an email, and I'm more than happy to answer your questions. So, all right, so I'm going to stop